Hilchos Kiddush Hachodesh Perek Shishi, the laws of sanctifying the new month, chapter 6. Says the Rambam Halacha Aleph, Bizman she'oisen al hariyah. In the time that the court used to decide the calendar, the new months, and the leap years, based on the sighting of the witnesses, not like today we have the fixed calendar. They used to actually wait for witnesses to come and say, we saw the new moon. So in that time, as the Rambam told us already in chapter 1, hayu mechashvin v'yoydin, the court used to calculate and they would find out sha'a sheyiskabetz boy hayareach im hachama b'dikduk harbe, the moment that the moon is going to come into alignment with the sun with great precision. They would figure out the exact moment, kederech sheha itztagnin oisin, as astronomers know how to do, kedei leida im yeroeh hayareach oy lo yeroeh, to know whether the moon is going to be seen or not going to be seen on the night of the 30th of the specific month. Okay, already explained a couple of times how this works. Sun and the moon are constantly going around the earth or orbiting the earth. And every month, there's a moment that's called the Molad, the conjunction, when the moon and the sun are in exact alignment relative to the earth. That's the moment when the moon completely disappears. Then the moon keeps moving past the sun, and by the time the next sunset arrives, the moon is further east, and it's possible for the moon to be seen just after sunset. Sometimes it takes a day, sometimes it takes less than a day. That's what the Beit Din was out to do. They had to figure out the exact moment that the moon and the sun would meet, and then based on that they can figure out if the next sunset it'll be possible to see the new moon. Now, that's the ultimate game. The ultimate game is to figure out the exact moment that the sun and the moon meet. But before that, they would figure out the inexact moment. Utchilas oisei hacheshben, the Rambam says, the beginning of that calculation, hu hacheshben shemechashben oisei bekeruv, is a calculation where you can reach the molad, you reach the moment of conjunction, but not exact, rather close to it, exactly. V'yoydin sha'as kibutzan beloy dikduk. They figured out the moment of their alignment without precision. And here, you have in many Rambam's apprentices, right, like you have.
Yeah.
And what are the words there? Usha'al, I think it's Usha'as kibutzan beloy dikduk. This moment of alignment, when it's not precise, ella b'mahalocham ha'emtzoi, rather, it's the average orbit, hu hanikra moilad, that's called the moment of conjunction, the moilad. What does it mean, the average or the inaccurate moment versus the accurate moment? So we're going to get a lot into this later, but just quickly, when you say the sun and the moon orbit the earth, typically you think that the earth is exactly in the center of that circle. But the truth is that the center of the sun's orbit is a little off-center to the earth. See that orange dot in the middle there? Mm-hmm. That's the center of the actual sun's orbit. So when we say the sun goes around the earth, yes, it's making a circle around the earth, but the earth isn't in the center of that circle. The center of the circle is a little off to the side, which means a very, very major ramification. We can only observe the sun from Earth, or the moon from Earth. That's where we observe the planets. So when we label where the sun and the moon are, we use, as I explained in chapter 1, this circle called the mazalot, the constellations, or in English it's called the ecliptic for fancy. In other words, we look out into the stars and we say, you want to know where the sun is? The sun is at 60 degrees or 90 degrees on this major galgal hamazalot. But look what happens. If you're viewing the sun from the center of the sun's orbit, and you draw a line from the center of the sun's orbit through to the sun, through to the galgal hamazalot, it's going to reach a different spot than if you drew a line from Earth to the sun, to the galgal hamazalot. You understand? Yeah. Somebody standing in the center of the sun's orbit is going to say the sun is at 82 degrees. But if you're on Earth, you're going to say, no, it's at 78 degrees. Because you're looking from two different perspectives. Even here, if me and you looked straight, right? The point ahead of me is going to be there. The point ahead of you is going to be here. So this is called, in the Rambam, the makom ha'emtsa'i versus the makom ha'amiti. The average placement versus the accurate placement. Average placement is the placement of the sun relative to its own orbit. Accurate placement is the place of the sun relative to the observer on Earth. So ultimately, the court would have to figure out where the sun and the moon are relative to the observer on Earth. That's the ultimate goal, to get to the Molad, to figure out when is the alignment going to happen relative to somebody standing on Earth. But first they would figure out the moment of alignment relative to somebody standing in the middle of the orbit of the sun and the moon. That's called the average, ma'alacham ha'emtza'i, or shat kibutzan below dikduk, to know the moment of alignment without accuracy. And that's what we're going to refer to in the entirety of today's chapter. When we talk about the Molad, the conjunction, we're talking about the conjunction of the sun and the moon relative to themselves, not relative to an observer, for which you have to make many adjustments, as we're going to learn in the later chapters. Says the Rambam, the Ikrei HaCheshboin, all the principles of the calculation, which we use to calculate at a time when there is no court that can set the new months based on the sighting of the moon, otherwise known as the calculation that we use today. In other words, all the mechanisms by which we figure out today how to set up our calendar, hu hanikra ibur, is called in the Talmud ibur. Ibur literally means intercalation, or making full years. Like a leap year is called Shnat HaIbur. But Ibur is also the general term which was used to describe the mechanisms of the calendar. In the Talmud, sometimes it's even called Sod HaIbur, the secret of making the calendar, because it was so complex many times. It took so much detail to figure out how to make the calendar. But the Rambam says, I'm going to give you some of the basics so you can have somewhat of an appreciation for what went into creating the calendar. And the Rambam begins with the following principle that you have to know going forward. First we have to figure out, how does halacha define time? So the Rambam says halacha beis, Hayoim v'halayla arba ve'esrim shoyes b'chol zman. For the purposes of our calculation, day and night are made up of 24 hours at all times. In other words, even though typically, if you go during the seasons, some days are shorter, some days are longer, some nights are shorter, some nights are longer. For the purposes of calculation, we have to assume that every day is a 24-hour day, exactly divided in half. Shtei mesrei bayoim or shtei mesrei balayla. 12 hours in the day, 12 hours in the night. Okay, so in other words, we're always going to assume that a day begins at 6 p.m. at sundown, sunrise is at 6 a.m., midday is at 12, and midnight is at 12.
Halachic time.
Halachic time. Okay? Now, we're going to later on in chapter 14, we're going to see that there's adjustments that are made for each season of the year to figure out how to match it to that day, if the day is shorter, the day is longer. But when you begin, you always begin with the premise of 12-hour days, 12-hour nights. Additionally, the hasha mechulekes le'elef u'shmeinim chalakim. In halacha, an hour is divided into 1,080 units. We don't make minutes and seconds. That whole thing doesn't exist in halacha. You have an hour, 1,080 parts. So if, let's say it's sometime between 12 p.m. and 1 p.m., we don't have in halacha 12:30 p.m. We have in halacha 12 p.m. and 643 parts, or whatever. If you want to convert it, really, if you want to know, each chelek, each unit, is equal to 3 1/3 seconds. That's how it is. So there's 18 chalakim per minute, if you want to know in hour times. But we go with 1,080 parts.
It's 0.33.
Yes, exactly. Says the Rambam, why this number? Was it a random number? Why did they use 1,080 parts? So if you look on the screen, you can see. Because it is only this number that is divisible into almost all the numbers 1 through 10. Yesh by chetzi, you can divide it in half. 1,080 divided by 2 is 540. Urivia, you can divide it into quarters. Divided by 4, it's 270. Ushminis, you can divide it by 8 to 135. Ushlish, ushtus, utshua, you can divide it into 3, 6, and 9 as well. V'choymesh v'isur, and you can divide it into 5 and 10 also. The one number we're missing here is 7. You can't divide it in 7, but we got every other number. The commentaries want to know, why do you need 1,080? 360 is already divisible by all of these numbers.
Well, you can divide it by 7, it just wouldn't come out.
No, I know, yeah, it's not an even number. But if that's what we're looking for, why didn't we pick 360? You can also divide 360 by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 8, 9, and 10. Oops, that's a mistake there. Should say 9. You know what the answer is? This number is divisible by all these numbers plus their multiples. So if you go 9 times 6, whatever number is, 1,080 is divisible by that, but 360 isn't. So we picked the number that's divisible by all these numbers plus the multiples of all these numbers. The harbe chalakim yesh lechol elu hashemais, and every one of these units, half, quarter, eighth, third, sixth, nine, all these things, will contain multiple chalakim, multiple units of time. So the grand total is 1,080, and you can divide it as you wish, 1/3 of an hour, 1/4 of an hour, etc. Now says the Rambam, Gimel. Misha yiskabetz hayareach v'hachama lefi cheshbon zeh. Using this calculation, in other words, this average calculation, and knowing that days are divided into 24 hours, and each hour is divided into 1,080 units, from the moment that the moon and the sun come into alignment, ad sheyiskabetzu pam shniya b'mahalachem ha'emtzoi, till they align once again in this average walk, and average again means relative to itself, using the center of the sun's orbit, not the earth, as the center, takes tisha ve'esrim yoim, u'shteim esrei shois miyom shloishim mitchilas leiloi, 29 complete days, 12 hours from the beginning of the 30th night, u'shvan meyos u'shloisha v'tishim chalakim mishas shloishesrei, and 793 parts of this 13th hour. Okay, that's the number that's given over here. Just always remember this. 29, 12, 793. The time between one molad and the next, 29 days, 12 hours, 793 parts. This is the time between one molad and the next. This is known as a lunar month. A lunar month is, if you wanted to get exact, not 30 days, not 29 days. A lunar month is 29 days, 12 hours, 793 parts. Daled, Shana Shel Levana, Im Tia Shnei Masar Chodesh Mechadashim Elu. A lunar year, in other words, if you were to take this times 12, 12 of 29, 12, 793, Yiyeh Klala, the total would be Shleish Meis Yoim, the Arba V'Chamishim Yoim, Ushmeina Shois, Ushmeina Meis V'Shisha V'Shivim Chalakim. A lunar year, you can see it over here on the top, 12 lunar cycles, 354 days, 8 hours, 876 units of the next hour. Because remember, it goes till 1,080, it becomes an hour. V'imtia Meuberes, if it's a leap year, in other words, 13 lunar cycles, V'tia Hashana Shloisha Asar Chodesh, and the year would be 13 months. Yiyeh Klala, the total will be Shleish Meis Ushmeinim Ushleisha Yoim, V'achas V'esrim Shois, V'chamesh Meis V'tisha Ushmeinim Chalakim. Again, you see it on the screen there, 383 days, 21 hours, and 589 parts of the next hour. Ushnas HaChama, now let's compare this to a solar year. A solar year for today's purposes, even though we're going to see in chapter 10, there's another opinion, but today we're going simple. Hishleish Meis Chamisha V'shishim Yoim V'shei Shois is exactly 365 days and a quarter. 365 and 6 hours. Nimtza, so it turns out, Toisvis Shnas HaChama, Shnas HaLevana. What's the differential? What is the difference between a solar year and a regular lunar year, 12 lunar cycles? Asara Yomim, the Achas V'esrim Shois, U'masayim V'arba Chalakim. In other words, at the end of every year, if we would leave the calendar to its own devices, the sun would be ahead of the moon by 10 days, 21 hours, and 204 parts. That you see over here. Difference between the solar and the lunar year is 10 days, 21 hours, 204 parts. This is very important because this is going to dictate how we make leap years. But we're going to get back to that in a minute. Now that Rambam says for a moment, he introduces the concept of she'erit. She'erit means remainder. In our calculations, many times the bigger sum of numbers isn't relevant to the point of discussion. For example, in this case, if we want to figure out the molad of 1 month to the next, if I know that today is the molad at 12 p.m., and I want to figure out when's going to be the next molad for the next month, so if I wanted to do the long way of math, I would add 29 days, 12 hours, and 793 parts. But what I can really do as a workaround is every time I get to the number 7 days, it's coming back to the same day of the week. So I don't really care about every unit of 7. All I have to do is take away 7 days, 7 days, 7 days, 7 days, take away 28 days. I don't have to bother with them. And I just go 1 day, 12 hours, 793 parts, and I have the next molad. In terms of weekday.
So you would divide
I won't have the date.
difference.
Yes. So you take away all the bigger sums and just keep with the remainder. That's the principle that Rambam introduces right now. Hey, kishetashlich yemei Chodesh halevana shiva shiva. If you throw away the days of a lunar month in groups of 7, shehen yemei hashavua, which are a full week, Yishar will remain yom echad u'shteim esrei shois u'shvam meis u'shleisha v'tishim chalakim. It will remain 1 day, 12 hours, 793 parts. Simon lahem, the sign for them is ib tashtzag. Aleph, that's 1 day. Yud Beis is 12 hours. Tashtzag, Tafshin Tzad Gimel, 793 parts. V'zuhi she'edis Chodesh halevana. That's called the remainder of a lunar month. The remainder of a lunar month means the amount of time that remains when you throw away the bigger sums that aren't relevant. 129, 793. V'chein kishetashlich yemei shnas halevana shiva shiva. Take the lunar year. The lunar year was 354, 8, 876, right? Throw them away in sets of 7. Im shana pshutahi, if it's a regular year, yishar mimena, all that remains is arba yamim u'shmeina shoyes u'shmeina meis v'shesha v'shivim chalakim. 4 days, 8 hours, 876 parts. Siman la, the sign for that is dach tatav. Dach is dalid chet, 4 days, 8 hours. Tatav, 876 parts. V'zui she'edis shana pshuta. This is the remainder of a regular year. 350 is divisible by 7. So you throw that all away, and all you have is the 4 days, 8 hours, 876 parts. V'im shana mu'uberesi, if it's a leap year, which is 383 days. So 378, right? Tia She'erisa, the Rambam says, 378 is divisible by 7. Therefore, Tia She'erisa, the remainder will be Chamisha Yamim, V'achas V'esrim Shoyes, V'chamish Mesh, Tisha Shmenim Chalakim, Siman Lahem, Hacha, Hika, Takpat. Whatever Rambam you're using over here, you have different vowelizations for these mnemonics. 5 days, 21 hours, and 589 parts. And that's the remainder of a leap year. Why are these remainders important? Because these remainders will allow you to calculate the molad from one year to the next super quickly. As the Rambam says, Vav, K'sheyiyeh im chayadua, Molad Hachodesh min hachadashim. If, let's say, you have known, you start with a known factor of a molad of a given month, v'toisif alav ib tashtzag, and you're going to add onto it 1 day, 12 hours, 793 parts, Yetzei molad sha'achrav, you will automatically have the following molad. You will know exactly which day of the week, which hour, and how many parts of the next hour it'll be. And the Rambam will immediately demonstrate it. Ketzah, what does this look like practically? Let's say the molad of Nisan, of a certain year of Nisan, was on Sunday, 5 hours into the day, which means really Saturday night, and 107 parts of the next hour. Siman lahem ahakaz. Aleph, Sunday, 5 hours into the day. Kuf zayin. K'shetoisif alav she'edis Hachodesh halevana. When you're going to add the remainder of a lunar month, just add 1 day, 12 hours, 793 parts. Yetzei molad iyar. The molad of the next month will be Belil Shlishi, Chamei Shayis Balayla, Uchameis Chalakim. Monday night, 5 hours into the night, and 900 parts. So I'm sorry, I misspoke. 5 hours into the day was actually 5 hours into the day. 17 hours really, because 12 hours of night, 5 hours into the day. Then when you add 1 day, that becomes Monday morning. 12 hours, that becomes Monday night. And Monday night, 5 hours into the night, with 900 parts. Simon lahem, ga tatak. Gimel, Tuesday, hey, 5 hours into Tuesday. Tatak, 900 parts into the 6th hour. And this way we'll go till the end of the world, month after month. Just keep adding 1 day, 12 hours, 793 parts, and you will know molad to molad, month to month. That's if you want to go slowly, month by month. V'chein halacha ches, you can go year by year. If you know the molad for a certain year, Tishrei of a certain year, and you add the remainder to that day of the full year, the remainder being second one, 4/8/876. In pshuta she'edis pshuta. If it's a regular year, you add the remainder of the regular year. V'mu'uberes she'edis mu'uberes. If it's a leap year, you add the remainder of the leap year. Yetzei lecha molad shana shala'achareh. You will get the molad of the next year, 12, year to year. V'chein shana achar shana ad seif olam. You can go from year to year till eternity. The hamoilad harishain shemimenu taschil. The first molad, which we always begin from, for all purposes of calculation, hu molad shahaya bashana harishayna shal yitzira, is the molad that was at the beginning, the first year of creation. V'hu haya belil sheni, chamei shayis balayla, u'masayim ba'arba chalakim. It happened on Sunday night, 5 hours into the night, 204 parts. Siman lahem baharad. The sign for this is Beis, Monday. Hey, 5 hours into Monday, that's Sunday night. Reish Dalet, 204 parts. Umimenu hu tchilas hacheshbain. That is the starting point for all of these calculations. It's a bit complicated. The commentaries discuss if the sun, moon, and stars only began to function on Wednesday, which is Tuesday night. How do we have a molad Sunday night? I mean, where were the sun, moon, and stars? It's complicated. We're going to get more into it in chapter 9 and 10. But the bottom line is that this is actually, it's called molad tohu. It's an imaginary molad. We back up the calculations for purposes of precision, and we say as if there was a sun and a moon on Sunday night. That's when they first came into alignment, and we move on with all calculations from there.
Why do you want to know the first molad of creation?
Otherwise, you have no starting point. how will you be able to add 1 day, 12 hours, 793 parts? You have to know when the first one was. You can make up your own, you can, based on that, make your own calculations and figure out where 5784 is and then use that as your starting point. But you got to have a starting point. Someone's got to give you the first information. Tess. In all these calculations which you use to find out the molad, when you add a remainder to a remainder, this is a basic mathematical principle that Rambam just spells it out. When you hit 1,080 units, you make it into 1 hour and you add it to the hours. Right? If the calculation requires you to add 600 parts to 500 parts, you're not going to say now I have 1,100 parts. You're going to say now I have an hour and 20 parts, because 1,080 becomes an hour. Once you accumulate from the hours, 24 hours, of course, you add it into a day, and you add it to the number of days. If someone tells you to add 17 hours to 10 hours, you don't have 27 hours. You have a day and 3 hours. And once you get 7 days, you just throw away 7 and ignore it, because all you care about is the day of the week, and every 7 days, of course, the week returns to its original place. We're not trying to figure out the number of days, in other words, calendar days, in between one molad and the next. All we're after is to know when in the week, which hour and which part of the next hour will be the molad. Yud says that Rambam, Kol Chas Reshana, Sheyu Mehen Sheva Shanim Ubaris, Ushtem Pshutais, a cycle of 19 years, of which 7 are leap years and 12 are regular years, Nikra Machzor, is called a full cycle. In the calendar, 19 years becomes a cycle. Why is 19 years the cycle year? If you were to take 12 regular lunar cycles, 12 times 12 that is, plus 7 13-month lunar cycles, all the hours and all the parts of the hours, and you're going to make every 1,080 into an hour, every 24 hours into a day, and you're going to add it to the number of cumulative days. It's going to exactly equal 19 solar years. Which each of those years are 365 and a quarter days exactly. And the differential between all the solar cumulative years and all the lunar cumulative years will only be just 1 hour and 485 parts, less than an hour and a half difference. If you keep making 7 leap years and 12 regular years every 19 years, the solar and lunar calendars will basically align, aside for 1 hour, which is a tiny difference. And we'll see in chapter 10, we could even align it to be totally exact. Right. That's why 19 years becomes a full cycle. Yud Aleph, Nimtza b'machzer shehu kazeh, such that in a total cycle that looks like this, Hachodesh kulam chodshei alevana v'hashanim shnei achama. All the months are lunar months because you follow the lunar revolution to create a month. But in the total, the years will follow the solar year, right, which is exactly our mitzvah. Our mitzvah is, as the Rambam begins, to make lunar months and solar years.
A good way to explain it,
yeah,
is your solar birthday. Let's say it's April the 15th. Which, in the year I was born, was the third of the year. So every 19 years, the third of the year and April the 15th will land on the same day.
That's true. That's exactly why your secular and Hebrew birthday coincide every 19 years, because the solar and lunar calendars coincide every 19 years. Right. Now, says the Rambam, using this calculation, when do we make the 7 leap years in every cycle? Haim, they are the following. Shana shlishis min hamachzor, year 3, v'shishis ushminis, year 6 and year 8, ushnas achas esrei, ushnas arba esrei, ushnas shva esrei, ushnas cha esrei, year 11, year 14, year 17, year 19. Siman lehem, guch, gimel vav ches, 3, 6, 8, ya, yad, yaz, yat, 11, 14, 17, 19. And the reason for this is very simple. And I wish I had on the slide all the information, but if you think about it, the difference between the solar and lunar years is 10 days, 21 hours, 204 parts, okay? Let's just round that up. Let's just call that 11 days. We can get really exact, but let's call it 11 days. So that means that after 1 year, the solar and lunar calendars are off by 11 days. After 2 years, they're off by 22 days. After 3 years, they're off by 33 days. So in the third year, you add a leap month, extra Adar, that's 30 days. So you take care of 30 days. Now you still have 3 days left over. Okay, so keep counting. Year 4, another 11 days, that's a total of 14 now. Year 5, another 11 is 25. Year 6 is 36. So in year 6, we put in a leap month, 30 days, takes care of 30. But now we have 6 days left over. So what do? Year 7 is 11 days, we're already at 17. Year 8 is at 28. Once we hit 28, even right here in year 8, we're going to add 30 days. I'm going to get 2 days credit. Now the lunar year is ahead of the solar year by 2 days credit. Let's keep going. Year 9, we have 11 days, but we take away 2 because we have 2 credits, so we only have 9. Year 10 is now 20. Year 11 is now 31. Put away 30 for the leap month in year 11. 1 day left over. Year 12 is now 12 days, because 11 plus 1. Year 13 is 23 days. Year 14 is 34 days, right? 34, we take off 30, now we have 4. Year 15, 15 days. Year 16, 26 days. Year 17, 37 days. Take away 30, and now we have 7 days left over. Year 18 is 18 days. Year 19 is 29 days. So we add 30 days, it's 19 years right there. We'll have a little bit of an extra day of credit, but not really, because I rounded it up to 11. That's why it comes out to be a full extra day. But if you go with exactly 10 days, 21 hours, it actually comes out to exactly the number of 30 days, and then you're good after 19 years. Yud Beis, kishetekabetz she'eris kol shana mishtemes shana hapshutais. She'idach tatav. If you gather up the remainders of all the 12 years, 12 regular years in the cycle, 4 days, 8 hours, 876 parts. And the leftover of every of the 7 leap years, 5 days, 21 hours, 589 parts. And you throw it away in groups of 7. Yishar will remain 2 days, 16 hours, 595 parts. Simon lahem biv takza. Biv, beis, yudvav, 2 days, yudvav, 16 hours. Takza, 595 parts. V'zehu she'edis hamachzer. This now gives you the remainder of a total 19-year cycle. And now you can jump from 19-year cycle to 19-year cycle super easily. When you know the molad of the beginning of a machzer, beginning of a cycle. You're going to add 2 days, 16 hours, 595 parts. You will get the molad of the beginning of the next cycle, 19-year cycle. And you can go from machzer to machzer, cycle till eternity. We already said, the molad at the beginning of the first machzor was Hayal Baharad, was Monday, Sunday night, 5 hours into the night, 204 parts. Molad Hashana, who Molad Tishrei Shoyes Hashana. That molad was the molad of Tishrei. So you have Rosh Hashanah at the beginning of cycle number 1. Just go cycle number 2, cycle number 3, cycle number 4. This year I think we're in the middle of the 308th or something.
I believe so.
We're in the middle of the 308th cycle of 19 years. So you can really skip 19 years. By 19 years, it's very easy. You can use this method to know the molad every single year you want, every single month you want. You can go backwards or forwards. You just subtract or add the numbers. Ketzad. How can you arrive at any number? Just count the days of creation. We're year 5784. Take all those years. Make them divided into 19 groups of 19 years till Tishrei of that given year. Figure out how many full cycles have passed and how many individual years of the next uncompleted cycle have passed. For every 19 years, take 2 days, 16 hours, 595 parts. Every one of the regular years that has passed from the uncompleted cycle, 4 days, 8 hours, 876 parts. For every leap year, you take 5 days, 21 hours, 589 parts. With the kabetz hakol, gather up all the totalities, all the remainders. Turn the units into hours, hours into days. And all the days into groups of 7. And whatever remains from the days, hours, and parts, will be the molad of the next month that you wish to know its molad. But it will always give you the results for the first month. Molad hashana sheyetze b'cheshbon zeh hu molad Chodesh Tishrei. The molad of a year will always bring you to the beginning of the year, the beginning of the month of Tishrei. You add 1 day, 12 hours, 793 parts. You get the molad of the next month of Cheshvan, which we're in right now. You add 1 day to that, 12 hours, 793 parts. You get the molad for the next month of Kislev. And so too you go on from month to month till eternity.